Hello, welcome again to Bipolarcast. This is a podcast where me and Matt talk to people who have bipolar disorder and are on ketogenic diets. And we've also started talking to people who help people with bipolar disorder and psychiatric conditions using metabolic approaches. Today, we're very excited to have Nicole on the show. And a bit about Nicole, she's a licensed mental health counselor that helps people use ketogenic diets as a therapy for mental illness and neurological issues. She uses a variety of nutritional and functional methods of treatment in her work and provides evidence-based psychotherapy modalities in adult client populations. So Nicole is someone who we found online talking about ketogenic diets and their use for mental health. And it's just so refreshing and exciting to see websites like yours, Nicole, like your blog that talks about this. And when you go to someone that is a mental health, like a psychotherapeutic approach or a counselor, one of the which I've done, and I imagine Matt might have as well, and many people with bipolar do, the diet we feel like diet should be one of the first things that's brought up. Okay, like before we start with all your Freudian dramas, can we talk about what you're eating? And it's just not even part of the conversation. So you trained in a psychotherapeutic approach, and what was it that first made you notice with your patients that this was a necessary component of the process or something that was missing?
Yeah, well, I'm classically trained cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior, that kind of stuff. We're doing a lot of yard work across the street. Hope that's okay. So yeah, just a regularly trained licensed mental health counselor. And then I had my own experience with ketogenic diets. I had my own health crisis that was huge. And I did the ketogenic diet and I noticed that I had anxiety that went down, and I wasn't even really kind of consciously aware that I had any anxiety. I just used all my therapy tools like I told my clients to, and it kept it under check. And it wasn't really in my awareness. But then I did a ketogenic diet to deal with something that was going on with me. And I noticed it just went down. I just was chill. I was like, whoa, I was anxious. I didn't even realize that I was anxious. My experience, my health experience was around neuropathic pain, and then all of the problems, the neurodegenerative processes that come with having neuropathic pain and being on the medications for neuropathic pain and all that. So that was just a whole awful kind of drama that lasted many, many years. And by the time I had gotten done, my brain was just so harmed from that process that I met criteria for stage 1 Alzheimer's, actually.
Wow.
It was really, really bad. And I came across ketogenic diets on some podcasts, and they were talking about, I've got a cat. They were talking about how ketogenic diets are good for Alzheimer's and all that kind of stuff. And mine wasn't from that type of neurodegenerative process, but it sure looked like a duck, quacked like a duck. And so I was going to treat it like a duck. And after listening to many, many podcasts, because again, my ability to learn was just really damaged. I could not read for very long periods of time. I began to have trouble noticing faces or remembering faces, recognizing like it was very bad. We had just moved. I had to use the Google lady, we call her, right, to get around town, even though I'd been there many times. So I did that, and my brain just lit up. My brain just lit up with energy, like for the very first time. And I was like, oh, this is it. This is gonna fix it. And it did. I went back to college. I got a Maryland University of Integrative Health. I got a postgraduate certificate. Like it just really flourished. My brain's much better than it was even before my chronic pain condition. And so, go ahead.
How quickly after you started the diet did you see relief from some of these symptoms?
I feel like it was in the first week where my brain turned on, and I was like, oh, like I don't even know. That's the only way you can kind of describe it. It's like your brain turns on. You're like, oh. Like you're awake kind of for the first time, and you feel kind of very present, and it's great. But the actual probably it took about a year to feel like I could read for longer periods of time and find words easier, because I was in pretty bad shape. So yeah, it was great. And again, my mood, when you don't have brain energy and you've got a neurodegenerative process going on, everything is, even the smallest things are overwhelming. And so I just had a great time. Like I suddenly, like 3 months after I did the ketogenic diet, I was like, I'm going to go work out. I feel great. And I joined a gym. And before then, I was always kind of tired. I had to monitor my energy and, that kind of thing. So it was amazing. And, now I'm CrossFitting 3-4 times a week, and I have plenty of energy to learn, and my mood is chill. Life isn't overwhelming. You're taking on new things. So I had that huge experience. And so here I am, a therapist, and I'm sitting with clients that I know are completely micronutrient deficient, that I know are completely not taking care of themselves and have no idea how to take care of themselves. I see them on many, many medications. I know that those can cause nutrient depletion syndromes. I know that they've got metabolic disorders of the brain going on, because, as you keep learning as you go through all this. And here I felt like I couldn't say anything. And here I'm watching people struggle to do things like cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, They're struggling to do exposure techniques, and their neurotransmitter balance is just so poor, that glutamate overexcitability, that those imbalances, that it makes all the work that you need to do and want to do for therapy exponentially harder. And so I kind of got to the ethical, I got to the place where I was like, me not saying something is unethical. Me not, and then there's always this fear of, you got to stay in your lane and you're going to get sued for, malpractice. You shouldn't be talking about nutrition. You're a therapist. You're licensed for this. You're not licensed for that. You can't give this advice. You can't be interdisciplinary in how you treat. And then I got to the place where I kind of didn't care. And then I took this great clinical training with Georgia Ede. You guys are probably familiar with it, where she teaches prescribers and non-prescribers how to do ketogenic diets with clients for mental illness and neurological disorders. And just sitting with all those other clinicians that were just like, we're going to do this. I was like, okay, that's it. Now that changes everything for me, that mentorship, or those models, those really brave people that are doing this and trying to help people with it. So, and then I finished my training with Georgia, and I was like, there's a lot of evidence base for this. Like, there's really a lot of evidence base for the underlying biochemical stuff that goes on with a ketogenic diet. We know a lot about ketones, or quite a lot. I mean, about one of them at least, right? BHB, and there's all this stuff. And so I should write a blog. And then I was thinking, as I was learning more about the research around the ketogenic diets and ketone properties in particular, and the molecular signaling and all that, it talked about these kind of 4 factors, so neurotransmitter imbalances, oxidative stress, neuroinflammation, and glucose hypometabolism, or brain hypometabolism. And I was like, I think that's in every single mental illness. I'm going to check that out. I'm going to look up PTSD, and I'm going to look up bipolar, and I'm going to look up OCD, and I'm going to look up alcoholism. I'm going to see, are those factors in all of these? And they were. Like, I think there's like just 1 or 2 where it didn't have one of those, but there was usually 3, And so then I would just simply apply what I learned about that particular disorder. And I would say, well, how would a ketogenic diet potentially help this disorder based on these findings? And so then I wrote all the blog posts.
I definitely relate to what you say about the ethical responsibility to talk about this, because when you experience the shift from a non-ketogenic state to a ketogenic state, as someone with one of these conditions, mild cognitive impairment or bipolar disorder, not everyone with bipolar disorder will respond to this, but the people who do, it's like a different category of response for many people. And Georgia published about this recently in her paper, showing these 31 patients, 12 of them bipolar, you know, and the mood improvements were so significant, you know, compared to what you typically see in trials. It was very, obviously at the moment where we're using small sample sizes, case studies, case series, but it's building the case for this kind of significant improvement that can happen, and has been reported anecdotally by people with bipolar for such a long time. And I've spoken to people personally, and obviously experienced it myself, and that it's like it's like what you hope medication would do for you sometimes with ketones. Like I could take a ketone ester, I could be in a almost suicidally depressed state where I was like, you know, unable to function, like seriously considering whether I could continue with life, and take a ketone ester and see my ketone levels go up to 3 or 4 millimolar and be in like complete remission after 2 hours. It was just, to me, that was remarkable. I was like, this is what I always hoped that the things I was taking would do, and it's actually doing it. It's making me stable. So I can completely relate. So when you've obviously, with respect to, you know, confidentiality and so forth, what can you share about working with bipolar people from this, with the clients that you've worked with, and how they respond to ketogenic diet and to these metabolic approaches?
Yeah. So with bipolar disorder, I tend, in my clients, my clinical experience, what I have seen is a reduction of medication. I've seen a stability of mood. I've seen them. I'm smiling because I think that I get really excited about the part where they can start to imagine themselves as someone who's well. I mean, that's like my favorite, that's kind of my favorite part. I mean, they walk in with this, I have this disease. I'm going to have to manage this my whole life. This is always going to be this really difficult management. And it almost, this diagnosis is really tough because it will almost supersede someone's sense of self. And they will start to believe that the symptoms are their personality. It's really, and so I get really excited. I'm smiling because I get really excited because they're like, oh, it's like they get to kind of really experience themselves without that over their head. I mean, yes, they have bipolar disorder, but it's not the who they are type of thing. It's not the, I'm this person and this, you know? Yeah. So that's what I see. I see the opening of possibilities. I see such an improvement in function that they start to dream about doing other things. And that's what I see for sure. I do have some that choose to stay on some medications. And I'm not a prescriber at all in any way, shape, or form. But I sometimes wonder if they need to be on the medication still, or if it's kind of a security thing. So, but some of them absolutely stay on medications to some degree, but usually there's quite the lowering of the dosages and a discontinuation of many.
And just to be clear, you're working with their psychiatrist. Essentially, there's an interaction where they're lowering the doses and supervise. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really important that they have a cooperative prescriber. And quite frankly, in my experience, that has been the biggest obstacle. Not that the prescriber is trying to be difficult in any way, shape, or form. They just do not have any training on why on prescribing on people with low carb diets. Like I get people who will, you know, they'll be on very high doses of medications, and you know, we're 6 weeks, 6, 7, 8 weeks into, excuse me, ketogenic diet. And I know their ketone levels are great, and I know their brain is healing, and I know they're doing really well, and they'll start to get side effects. And I'll say, hey, that might be potentiation. That might be that your brain is working better now. And the amount of Wellbutrin or the amount of whatever you're on, it might be too high for you now. Look, let's look up these side effects. Oh, look, you have this side effect and this side effect. And this might be potentiation. And they're like, well, okay. And I said, you might need a bridge medication, but this also might just mean you need to lower your dose. And they'll go to their prescriber, and because the mindset is add a medication, they don't get deprescribed. It's kind of scary being over here. You know, I'm like, this person's got suicidal ideation, and this is a side effect of Wellbutrin, and you've got them on 300 milligrams, and you're going to add another one on. Like, we really have to figure out a way that these prescribers understand that it is a different algorithm for the people doing ketogenic diets.
I think it can be challenging because a lot of these prescribers don't necessarily understand the impact that a ketogenic intervention can have. Like, it's basically rewiring the entire way your metabolism handles things and the energy balance in your body. And then, like you were saying, Nicole, the medications can just take on an entirely new effect, and things need to be readjusted. Is there any way we can help spread the word or educate the people who are prescribing the medications about how powerful this intervention is?
I think we need to go to the medical conferences and add CMEs. And I think that there needs to be that, I don't know where that happens or how that happens or how we get that into the schools, as part of the curriculum, or what needs to happen to do that. But I think that's kind of where it needs to go. Otherwise, these poor patients are like, no, really, this therapist who, they're not going to listen to me. I'm not a prescriber. I'm not an MD. This therapist that has me on this diet is saying I might need my medication reduced. Like, that puts my poor patient in a really difficult and unfair power differential in situation. And so I think it's that education piece and that understanding that this is a whole different banana. This is a whole different algorithm for prescribing, and that these medications, absolutely, like, that might be the first go-to instead of adding an additional medication on. Of course, using prescriber best judgment, but they don't have all the information to make that best judgment. So I think it needs to be CMEs. I love George's program, but there's also a lot of, and there's also a lot of prescribers who are not interested in helping anyone get on a ketogenic diet that still need to understand how to adjust medications for people on ketogenic diets. And so maybe something short and sweet, quick, here's your 3 CMEs, go off and help people type of thing would be good.
I mean, shout outs to Keto Live, who were doing CMA modules as part of the conference this summer, and it was a lot of that was Georgie was presenting, and there was a lot of psychiatry input into that. And I think, so how would you see CMEs being structured in a helpful way as you, someone that's meeting with people that are clearly struggling with these conditions? What would be a helpful way to structure a kind of CME course or module that would really be convincing or helpful for people that want to use this?
Yeah, well, and I think that we need to be able to offer them at regular medical conferenknow just low carb conferences. There's plenty of prescribers and psychiatrists that have no interest in low carb that still need to know how to do this. And mostly it's probably a section on how the brain metabolism changes, as far as we know. A review of the literature around, these are the mental illness diagnoses and some of the neurological diagnoses where we see these changes. Here's some of the great research going on, right? Here's the results from those. So they always want that piece. What's the research? And then like Georgia and that great study that just came out on that inpatient unit, that kind of stuff, being like, hey, look, almost all these people needed to be deprescribed. Some stayed the same, and this one person needed a little extra. So this is your algorithm. This is your paying attention piece, and talking about the potentiation effects, and how sometimes just going down on a medication for a couple days can while monitoring the patient, can help you decide whether that's a potentiation effect or if they need a bridge or something else needs to happen.
When you spring this on, your patients, are most of them excited and ready to take it on? Are they doubtful? Is it a mix? Do they adhere to the diet? What does that look like?
It's kind of, it's a mix. It's a mix. So I take insurance, and when you take insurance, you can't really niche down, you kind of get a little bit of everybody. And I don't, I'm in private practice. I don't work in any really difficult medical centers, like Chris Palmer has a very difficult population, and there's others that do. Mine's usually fairly highly functioning, but I do have some people with some, they've been on medications for many years and they've been sick for many years, and they're in bad shape. And I do bring up the nutrition. And some people I do it very carefully. And we all kind of know that. And some people I'm just right out there. Hey, I don't know if you know that I do this, but I need to tell you about this thing, and that this is potentially an effective treatment. And this is an alternative treatment that still has an evidence base. And let me tell you about it. And a lot of people are really open to it. And it's funny because the people that are really open to it, I'm always like really pleasantly surprised. They're like, let's start it. And I'm like, okay, I get really excited with them. And then there's some people that are like, why haven't I been told this? Why are you telling me this? Are you even trained in this? Right. And they just really have I'm here for therapy. Right. And I'm like, but you could get so much farther in your therapy if your brain worked just a little bit better. This is hard work. Therapy is hard work.
Yeah.
You need a working brain to really get the most out of it. So I just do it case by case.
I think it speaks strongly to how good this intervention can be for people, that you felt this ethical responsibility to share it with patients, because we're moving from the stage where we're in the early kind of case studies and emerging case series, and we want to move into pilot trials and randomized controlled trials. And once we have RCTs, then people will begin to be able to prescribe this if it shows results. And we're kind of moving through this process, but it's obviously difficult when you see that this could help people to be in the kind of early stages of this, as it was for epilepsy. People could see that, people were having multiple seizures a day, and especially children, like, this was developed for pediatric epilepsy. And so how can you look at someone, a child who's having fits and not give them this therapy that they, can help them? But this was the situation for many, many years, in fact, long periods with epilepsy, that you couldn't prescribe this until they had the trials and the studies. So I appreciate how difficult it is. I'm glad you didn't get me as one of your therapy clients when I was in therapy, because I was an absolute, I always wanted to talk about Freud and Carl Jung. And after I did ketogenic diet, all these things like automatically resolved themselves. I could have gone through decades of like, I remember at one point like pulling out, Carl Jung's Red Book and I was like, this has gone, way off of track. But when I went on keto, I didn't have those same like, existential worries, and a lot of these things resolved themselves. And so I can see how difficult it would be for, working in counseling someone that, that all these kind of complex psychological issues actually could be, underneath that could be a biological dysfunction that's bringing about some of these. And this has been the whole battle of bipolar research, is you can see these clear physiological signs of illness and these parameters, such as the things you're talking about, like neurotransmitter imbalances and inflammation and so forth. But the way people describe, experience it in their daily life is that they have concerns about their family, they have concerns about their job, they experience it in this very, it's not connected to their biology, it's connected to their environment. And to create that split is quite dramatic for someone with bipolar to experience that your biology can have such a huge effect on your mental state. What do you think are ways that people could experience? For me, one of the big ones was ketone esters. When I took it, I don't take them regularly because I'm not convinced the long-term that we don't have the data yet on the long-term effects, I think, for humans. But I experienced that shift in my biology that resolved a lot of my psychological concerns. Are there ways you could suggest that people could experience this, like for the first time, even through exercise or through sleep or through initiating a ketogenic diet? What would you recommend to kind of highlight that to someone?
Well, I just tell them, you got to experience this. You don't know what your brain is capable of until you have switched fuel sources and seen if it prefers this one over what you're using. Right? You don't know what you're capable of in terms of how well you can feel, how clear you can think, how fast you can find your words, what your mood is going to be like. Like, this is an exciting experiment. Let's do it for 3 months. Let's see. You'll probably know after a month. Let's do it for a month. Let's see. What would that look like? And a lot of people are like, yeah, I like to kind of experiment and see kind of what that looks like. And for my people, Yeah, I've tried the thing where, take some BHB salts or take some MCT oil and see how your brain feels with that. And that can be hit or miss, because when they're not ketogenic, I don't know if that works consistently. Like, some people will be like, oh yeah, I felt more energy, that was great. But there's a lot of people where I'll have them do that and they'll be like, I didn't feel anything. Ketogenic diets won't work for me. And then I'm thinking, oh, and they might have, because those don't fix the insulin resistance. Those don't fix a lot of different pieces kind of going on all by themselves. Like, there's a whole shift metabolically that I think they work better with. I haven't done esters. That might overshoot all of that and just get it done. Those are pretty powerful. But yeah, there's, sometimes it's just getting them off the sugar. Be like, yeah, you don't want, let's just get you off the processed carbs. Let's get you on a good quality multivitamin to deal with that B1 deficiency that you created with all these processed carbs that you're eating, right? Let's, hey, are you eating enough protein? Can you digest your protein? Do you have access to amino acids to make those neurotransmitters? Like, I'll whip out a schematic that shows the micronutrients needed in order to make, as cofactors to make your neurotransmitters. And I'll be like, your diet's terrible. You're not getting any of these. You can't make your neurotransmitters. You're not eating enough protein. It's not bioavailable. Your digestion's bad. You can't break it down to amino acids. Let's fix some stuff. And so sometimes that's where we start, is like a good broad spectrum micronutrient and some broken down amino acids where I don't have to worry about their poor digestion not being able to do the trick. And sometimes that's their intro into nutrition as a mental health intervention.
What about the actual logistics of the program? Do you have them track ketones? Do you have them track macronutrients, anything like that?
Mm-hmm. I do. Well, it depends. So my preference is that they track micronutrients and macronutrients using like chronometer, something that I can look at and kind of get a feel, because that really helps problem solve. And I also love to hook up their Keto Mojo with the Keto Mojo provider portal, so I can see that as well. And I watch them very closely for brain energy and how they're feeling. Have them do, BHB salt sometimes for that first 2 to 4 weeks, MCT oil sometimes a combination. Usually they don't need it, but some people do. Some people really just kind of feel a little tired and really pound home electrolytes. Like, you just can't say it to people enough. They just don't get it, how much salt they need those first 2 weeks. Like, in fact, sometimes I won't introduce the BHB salts and the MCT oils the first couple weeks, which you think I would, but the reason I don't is because they'll always go to that and ignore the electrolytes. Oh, I'm feeling tired, I'm going to take this. I'm like, no, electrolytes first. If you still feel yucky after your electrolytes, then maybe take the ketone stuff. So it depends on the person. That is my preferred way of doing ketogenic diets for bipolar. And the reason for that is because you are learning a whole different way of eating, and you need to start to understand how many carbs are in things. And I think you don't really quite learn that until you track for a month or 3 months or something like that. So that's my preferred, because I want a nice sustainable lifestyle change into it. And also looking at more current research. Dom D'Agostino was talking about, there was a study done where they were saying that 4 to 6 weeks transition into ketogenic diet led to more stability in terms of lifestyle change and the ability to stick with it. So I've moved from encouraging over the last year, encouraging them to just go for it, to let's start to track your food and let's start to cut your carbohydrate intake each week until we get you down there. And I think I'm not tracking my data or anything clinically, but I think I'm seeing kind of less problems in the induction phase in terms of electrolytes and that kind of stuff. And plus, I have them on supplements the first month, so they're getting like a micronutrient kind of replenishment that's going on, so that when they do hit that adaptation phase, I feel like they're just a little bit more well-nourished, a little bit more resilient, a little bit more able, has the materials their brain needs to do all the things.
When I was working with Dr. Palmer initially a year and a half ago, going on the ketogenic diet, he mentioned to me that initially during the first couple of weeks, I might see some sort of mood disturbance just as I was adjusting to the diet, taking all these electrolytes. I should watch out for hypomania, anything like that, should track my moods. Do you think that transitioning into the diet over a period of weeks and gradually, gently lowering the carbs rather than just going for it all at once could help with those kind of initial onset symptoms? Or, and if so, have you
Yeah.
seen that?
I'm not sure. I feel like it does. I feel like I'm seeing that. I think that there's benefits both ways. If someone is in really, really bad shape and they just need to feel better as soon as possible, and they have a support system, you know what I mean? I feel like that's certainly possible, that might be a better way to go about it. In fact, when some of my clients, I'll be like, hey, let's do it slow. They're like, no, I'm miserable. I'm doing the thing. Just tell me how to not get super, feel really bad doing it. And they do just fine. But there is more of they're doing great with keto and then they fall off. And then it's a little bit of a crisis. And then they're doing well with keto and they fall off. And it's a little bit of a crisis. I feel like there's less of those ups and downs when you do it more slowly, because they already have their 12 recipes that they're like cycling through, and they already know how to order at a restaurant, right? Because they've practiced. So I think it leads to more stability later, but you could definitely do it either way as long as you have a supportive prescriber and you're watching for it, and hopefully a support system. I think it's all good.
This is one of the things we're interested in the trials, is how do you structure the diet and deliver the diet to people with mental health conditions in a way that's sustainable for them. And it's an additional, it's never been done before. It's an additional puzzle to how you deliver it to someone with epilepsy. There's unique considerations, like binge eating disorder is very highly comorbid with bipolar disorder. And people really struggle with their diet, and many of my friends who are bipolar are just constantly on kind of carb cravings and sugar highs. And it's not very well recognized, but if you search, for studies on binge eating and bipolar, it's just such a massive problem in that population. So we are working with dietitians we're doing these sort of parallel trials across Stanford, Edinburgh, and James Cook. And then Dom D'Agostino is doing one on depression in Florida, and then Virta Health are doing one on depression as well. And we're trying to kind of communicate about what the best ways of delivering this diet are, because they're incredibly skilled and knowledgeable through doing this with epilepsy. So we have someone on our team, Helen Grossi, who has been delivering this for 20 years to kids with epilepsy. And she's really, and it's just amazing what she's able to achieve in getting people with bipolar who have these binge eating type disorders to do a diet. And we're seeing sort of early, really promising results for that. But I think as time goes on, especially, kind of collating the data, we'll have a really strong idea of what are the ways that are safe and what are the ways that are effective and keep people on this diet long term. If as these trials are kind of being designed and worked on, what advice would you give, and what considerations would you say would be important for constructing a diet for people with bipolar that is helpful and has a kind of long-term sustainability to it?
Yeah. So I, because of what I went through with my brain and understanding neurodegeneration, and understanding that neurodegeneration happens with bipolar disorder as the years go on of an untreated disease process. Neurodegeneration is a piece of it. And so I think that I really like the modified Atkins. I like that extra bit of protein because I think that helps rebuild brains, and I think that helps with a lot of things. And I think that's the macros that I provide for my bipolar patients. There has been like one or two that have needed a very classical ketogenic diet, at least for a while. And I wonder if that's till their brain heals to a certain point, and then but that's just me trying to figure things out. But so I think that protein piece is really important for people's healings, and sometimes prioritizing that is a big help, particularly in people who are having some binge eating type of type of things. But that's just kind of what I've seen clinically. I do an online, it's not for bipolar disorder, it's for brain fog, which is, early neurodegeneration processes. And we say early on for the most healing, a meat and a vegetable. So I don't have them make all the keto cookies and the keto treats and the keto bars and stuff like that, because I think that keeps that craving going on unnecessarily. And so we have them, it's a meat and a vegetable, and lots of oil and fat, right? And that's what we do. And I think that reduces that craving quite a bit as well. And so, yeah, I think it would be great to do some trials just with the different factors around what helps those cravings kind of go down. I think you keep eating. I think that hunger signal keeps going on until you get the amino acids you need for your body to work. And so I think prioritizing protein's a big deal.
Do you give them any advice about dealing with these cravings and eating out and just doing the diet pragmatically?
Yeah. So eating out like for the 4th of July, the private Facebook group had a lot of recipes flying through for side dishes and things that they were going to bring to picnics. Like, plan ahead. Here's this great coleslaw. Here's this great cauliflower potato salad. Make extra. People are going to want to eat this. They won't care that it's keto, right? How are you going to ask for your hot dog without a bun? Are you going, and so planning ahead for those celebrations that are generally around food is really important. Cooking, learning to cook is a big thing, if people don't know how to cook, but that is not an obstacle, because I have people who are really depressed or really, with bipolar or just treatment resistant depression that are like, I can't cook. I just can't. Great. We'll get you a meal service for a month. Where they just give you ketogenic meals. They're not like cold stone hard 20 grams of carbs, but they're much lower carb than what that person was eating. And you do that for a month, their energy goes a little bit up, they're taking some supplements, they're feeling a little better, they can begin to go towards, standing up and cooking a steak, stuff like that. Going out, when you check the menu ahead of time, if you can, you decide what you're going to order, you decide if there's going to be enough food. And then maybe you eat before you go, and then it's fine. And you still get to eat the thing with all the people. That's kind of one of the hardest parts, is eating out. Sometimes, especially if you're eating out at less expensive places, there's not a lot of meat on the menu. There's not a lot of, it's mostly carbohydrate. And so getting to a place where you're like, okay, I'm going to eat a meal before I go, or this is the time I fast anyways, and I can have this appetizer that has, a little something to eat. It's more of the social. It's not about, you're not going to get your big giant meal at that restaurant, at some restaurants. You'll just have to eat later, or you'll eat before, but set yourself up for success.
And one last question along this line of questioning. Do you ever notice that people can experience symptom relief in a low carb diet as opposed to like a strict keto diet? So even with ketones around 0.5 to 1, or do you find that their symptoms come back?
Well, I think that, I prefer that they do all the tracking, but I have had bipolar clients who have not tracked, did not know whether they were a full 20, but they ate like almost no carb, or very, very low carb. They had their vegetable at night, they had a package of Brussels sprouts, or, that type of thing. And I suspect that they were probably well under 50 to 60 grams of carbs. And they seem to do really, really well. And I've had a bipolar patient who we tried to get her down to 30 grams total or 20 grams total. And she's like, I don't feel good here, but when I add an extra 20, I feel great. I feel totally fine. But I get funny down here somehow this doesn't feel good for me. And we tried adding fats and like, why is that? What do you think's going on? We don't know, but she's up here and she's flourishing and she's doing great.
So, I mean, Chris Palmer said about 30% of his patients respond strongly. I think I'm getting this right from an interview. He had 30% respond strongly, 30% somewhat or significantly, and 30% don't respond. Is that roughly in line with your experience, but not even just across bipolar, but across all mental health conditions? What kind of response rates do you think are reasonable to expect from future trials?
Yeah, I haven't had someone who I would call a non-responder yet. Like at the very least, my brain works better. I have more energy. My anxiety is less. My mood is more stable. And I don't want to stay on this diet. I want to eat what I want to eat. And now I know a little bit more, like, if my mood is not good, I probably didn't take good care of myself for a few days and I know how to get back on track. And that's how they want to do it. And that's totally fine. I haven't had, I have not had anyone. I mean, I do well-formulated ketogenic diets that are nutrient dense, and we talk about bioavailability and that type of thing. And so I'm sure that has an impact in terms of, that. But for those that are consistent, I don't think I have seen a non-responder, which I know sounds crazy, but I have a very small practice. I work 15, 20 hours a week. Right now I have about 4 bipolar patients, so someone with a much bigger practice who especially specializes in particular populations might have something different.
So across all the bipolar people you've worked with, all of them have essentially responded to some degree. Mm-hmm. Wow. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, it's one of the questions, because as we go more into this, we might identify these kind of subtypes of bipolar. Some are more predicated on inflammatory response, some are more to do with insulin resistance in the brain, some are, there is a kind of stratification you can make of bipolar patients based on the response to lithium and other anticonvulsants and medications. And it indicates there's some subtypes of bipolar that exist that respond to different forms of treatment. Mm-hmm. And I do think, and actually I have a paper coming out in Translational Psychiatrists that talks about this, that you can kind of show through the response to lithium and other anticonvulsants and medications that you give in bipolar, that there's these different subtypes, and they might be responsive or non-responsive to things like ketogenic diet interventions. So it'd be really interesting to find out, is there a biomarker you can test for? Could you get a patient in, or could you even, when you're going through, if someone comes into counseling and you suspect they need this kind of help, could you refer them to get a blood test that would then say, is the first step here to start on ketogenic diet before we go down all the, and then we can go into the psychotherapy? That would be a great thing to have. So that's another thing we're really interested in, is biomarkers, is how can you identify what people respond, and then what intervention to give based on that. There's also indications that people respond to, metformin, the anti-diabetes drug, which is very interesting because it's an insulin sensitizer. So I do hope that this becomes a part of this process, because almost everyone I know that's bipolar has been through some form of therapy, and you can go for years and years and years. And if your brain doesn't have enough energy, you can go over the same childhood issues and once your brain is working, you can actually work with those things effectively. But if your brain isn't working, it's like, I gave this example of it's like you're driving down, the highway with your engine on fire and you're trying to adjust the air conditioning. It's like, we need to start with the engine and then we move on to the, so what would be the ideal situation? Someone has bipolar, they're in their teenage years, and they want to find out how to treat this. They come to you for therapy. What would be the process you would like to see happen with this? I mean, obviously you're implementing one, but if you could have all the resources available and to really do this properly, how would you like to, what resources would you like to be available? Blood tests, things like this.
Yeah. Well, I want to say something really quick about what you said about the stickiness. So there is a stickiness of thought. I don't know a better way to say it. I've done it. I've had this experience with vegan clients who it's not a well-formulated vegan diet. And I would therapy them to the moon and back, trying cognitively restructure them, the same thought every week. And every week they come back and the old one's back. There is a stickiness to nutrient deficiencies. That's really interesting, and neurotransmitter imbalances where you just cannot therapy that away. I don't care how great of a master therapist you are, that it just doesn't work. It doesn't stick. You just don't get very far. You might make them feel a little better by the end of session. They might feel good for a couple days after, but there's such a stickiness. And that is what I see too. And as soon as we start to do metabolic therapies and nutritional therapies, it goes away. Like someone just added eggs and chicken, and they come back new people in 2 weeks. It's crazy. I mean, it's just so wonderful, the amount of change that can happen with that. It surprises me every time. And I don't know why, because I've recreated it several times, but every time it surprises me. So that's a clue. When you are in psychotherapy and you are going every week and you were doing the work and you were working with the therapist to restructure your thoughts and do your DBT skills, and you just cannot make progress, it's not because you're not trying hard enough. It's not because your therapist sucks. It's because you just don't have the basic things you need for your brain to work. And there just needs to be a paradigm shift. You just can't therapy some stuff away. Some things you just have to have a working brain in order for the therapy to work. And I feel like there's a lot of people who've been in therapy for a really long time who are not being told that, and that's not on their radar, and that's unfair. That's unfair. This idea that you're so psychologically broken that you've worked with the very best therapist and it hasn't worked. That's unfair. That's not potentially that's not even potentially accurate, because how can you restructure your thoughts if your BDNF is in the toilet? How can you change your neurotransmitter balance and improve your mood if you don't have the basic cofactors you need to make serotonin, to make dopamine, to have some have your serotonin turn into melatonin because you don't have enough serotonin? We can give you SSRIs, but if you are low on B6 and iron and zinc, you're not going to make the serotonin. You're not going to make enough serotonin to hang out in those synapses to do the work. This is very unfair. Very unfair to our people. So my ideal is a low carbohydrate diet of some sort that is as replete in amino acids from bioavailable sources, a good broad spectrum micronutrient to start out with, and then I would love to do some nutrigenomics to check and see if they need some choline, see if they make vitamin A from beta carotene. There's lots of people who don't, that are vitamin A deficient. There's people who have genetic things going on where they need a lot more zinc and a lot more B6 or specialized forms. I think all of that is really important. And then if there's any residual symptoms left, I like to whip out some functional medicine testing and coaching to just kind of see, do we have mold toxicity going on? Do we have heavy metal burden? Do we have some sneaky little infection or parasite or something going on that's causing inflammation in the body, that's keeping inflammation going on in the brain? That's how I like to approach it. And then therapy throughout that. A lot of work can be done as that process is happening.
And again, I just want to relate this story because this is so important, what we're talking about, to any psychiatrists or people with this illness we're watching. In 2020, I went through March on 20 milligrams of Zyprexa, fighting the hypomania, getting less and less sleep and having to take more, and consistently worrying about this. When I went on keto in 2021, I was on 5 milligrams and I went straight through March with no hypomania, very little. I was on 25% of the antipsychotic dose that I had been on the previous year, doing the ketogenic diet, tracking my ketones, and I did not have mood elevation. And I had been fighting this constantly for years, trying to get my mood stable. So this is not a joke. This might sound like some crazy, diet, is it really gonna change things? Yes, it does. My experience changed my entire life, my illness, the way I don't think about it anymore. Now I can just do the diet. So I think what you're talking about, Nicole, about having some sort of program in place where we're doing a low carb diet, teaching people how to cook, eating, taking extra nutrients, doing the therapy alongside of it. And also what you're talking about how it's hard to do the therapy when people are deficient in micronutrients or people are eating a lot of carbs and their brains just aren't working. It's so important. And this is almost like the missing piece of the puzzle for me. For me, I can only speak from my experience, but it was the missing piece, along with good sleep and exercise and keto. Changed my entire life, changed the entire course of my illness.
It's and you don't often hear descriptions like that of how much of an improvement can happen. I mean, like when you spend your life with someone who's bipolar and speaking to friends who have bipolar, it's like, it always strikes me, like when you describe that, how significant a transition it was. I've never spoken to someone, apart from very occasionally with people on a Lamictal. Some people have a very strong response to that, but in general, you never hear that things have like turned around. It's just like, I'm just getting by, I'm just surviving, I'm just trying to make my way through life, and the medication is very sedating. And so, yeah, so I think it's just all the more important to, this is why we do this channel, is to share this, that this is happening to people. And you can read it online. If you just do a Google search, you can see that people talk about this all the time. Even yesterday, the day before, there's always threads coming up of people experiencing this and talking about it. And we're now working on the pilot trials to bring this into the literature and show it scientifically. And hopefully this will enable people like yourself that are seeing that this is valuable and can help people to have the scientific backing to say, hey, this really works. And like, we can show it through randomized controlled trials. We have the evidence, and this is something, and it won't have to be this kind of like fringe therapy that it is at the moment, as long as the results are, as long as the results are positive with the trials as they have been in the case studies and the case series so far. Then, we hope with like epilepsy, we won't be in this situation where you have young people that have this condition and you can't help them with this therapy that could be so beneficial to them. I certainly feel like when I was 16, I was looking for, I was like a suicidal 16-year-old looking for the drug that would really help, trying every possible thing. And then it was these ketone, the first time I experienced ketosis, I was like, oh, this is what I was looking for. Like it's fixing the thing that I know that is wrong with me. And I can't describe it any better way than that. So
yeah, you just know.
Yeah, and similar to yourself, how you described with your cognitive improvement through it, you just know that this is the thing that was wrong and this is what is making it better. So I really recommend checking out Nicole's blog. It's really interesting, and it has this really wide view of all the factors that play into bipolar. It's looking at lots of different things and other mental health conditions, and it's just a really fantastic resource for someone who obviously is benefited from this. You can tell that this is something you've been through personally, because no one gets so into this without having that experience, I think, themselves,
Yeah.
and that really shines through in what you write about it. And also I really respect the ethic you have to share this with people, because it can be helpful, even though this is fairly early stages of this. So so please check out mentalhealthketo.com. That's their address, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for the courage, Nicole, of coming forward to advocate this diet, because I know it's difficult, because people have this idea in their heads about, oh, it's going to be medication, it's got to be medication, and no ability to accept that a diet can have such a crazy impact. So we really appreciate your courage in coming forward to talk about this.
Yeah, I really believe people have a right to know all the different ways that they can feel better. And this should be on the table. So when I had my neurological pain, my doctor later said, "Oh, I said I did keto diet, and it's helped this and it's helped this," and he's like, "Oh, an anti-inflammatory diet," as though he's always known that it was an option, and it was never offered to me. And so that really drives me to be like, people should get to choose. Most certainly. And first they have to know, it has to be in their radar. And so that's what my blog's about.
It's possible that these, one of the things I was reading today, like one of the things you're talking about is how all these factors play into these mental health conditions, inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, neurotransmitter imbalance, so forth. And I just wonder whether people with bipolar and these conditions are just more susceptible to there's this huge pressure from the environment with insulin resistance, high glucose levels, and, all kinds of things that we're exposed to in the modern world. I just wonder whether what we'll find is that people with these conditions are just people that are, normal people can withstand that pressure from the environment to some degree. But if you have some genetic susceptibility or vulnerability, that same pressure from the same environment can just crack mechanisms that are really important for regulating your brain function. So I do wonder over time whether we'll see that a lot more people than we think are affected by this, that just in the same way that metabolic syndrome and diabetes affects the body of people, why would it, it's hundreds of millions of people suffering from these conditions. Why would it not be the brain also? What is the special thing about the brain that it would not be affected by this? And I think there's reasons why we didn't think it affected the brain that we now have resolved and realized are not relevant, like the insulin independent theory of the brain and so forth. So it could be that this becomes a really helpful thing for lots of people in psychotherapy to look at and say, before we start down all the roads that we can go down, let's try to address this. I just want to ask, as someone who went through psychotherapy, my way of dealing with bipolar before I found metabolic approaches and things that worked for me was through sort of like philosophical, trying to understand why I would want to continue living when life was so difficult. And there was really such a low quality in my life for quite a number of years that it was just really like a kind of debate with myself, like, what is the point in doing this if it's so much suffering? And not only that, with bipolar, you can see that it's hard for other people around you that are, and so you really, how do you help someone who has these concerns with bipolar, that the quality of life is so low? What would you say to them that would keep them going, or that you think would help them to keep going when they're in that state? It doesn't have to be about metabolic therapies. I'm just interested in your.
So for people in that place, I CBT and DBT. DBT would say even a life with pain is worth living. And not every moment is there pain. There are moments when you and your family are connecting. You're having moments where you get to be together and you're just a little bit present. There is, a little bit of joy in each day of some degree. And DBT and mindfulness in particular is very good about putting you in your right now. Right now, in this moment, I'm not too hungry. I'm not cold. I'm not too physically uncomfortable. In this moment, I have my cat on my lap. In this moment, so you bring yourself to your now, and you step away from the rumination about the past and your fears about the future, and you live in your now. You're right now in this moment. And so that constant refocusing of that. And then, of course, continuously challenging this belief that you have this disease and there's never going to be anything anyone's ever going to be able to do about it. I mean, that narrative really gets stuck in people's head. I think that kills more people than we can imagine. This idea that you have this disease and there's no real cure for it, and it's just these terrible medications. And we can Google, a whole list of diseases that are like that. CFS, fibromyalgia, whatever. And when people have blinders on about other options for treatment and only the medical establishment, that is my only options, that is dangerous because it kills hope. And it's completely ignoring all these different not magical, they feel magical ways that people find health and get better and recover. Like we're told, oh, those are the options. Those are the exceptions. That can't be me. I'm here. And so I think probably 90% of what I offer clients is not my techniques and my experience as a therapist. I can see you being well. And I can communicate that. I can communicate that I see the possibility of you becoming well. And I believe that's a possibility. And I might be the only person on your treatment team that believes that. But I know it to be true. I know there's possibility there. And so that's how I sit with patients.
Well, yeah. Perfect. Oh, sorry.
This is the key, is that it is possible to be raised like Lazarus. I mean, it is absolutely possible to do this diet, exercise, find the right meds, meditation, the psychotherapy, time outside, time with family, whatever it is, that magical cocktail of all these different parts of the recovery. And, maybe keto isn't going to necessarily work for everyone as well as it has worked for Ian and me and for a lot of others, but it is absolutely something worth trying. And it is absolutely something in a bipolar patient's arsenal that could potentially be part of this cocktail that people should be trying. And I think the real journey of having this illness is experimenting and trying to figure out, this has been my journey, trying to figure out what is this magical cocktail of different things in my life, different healthy habits, time with my family, time outside, mindfulness, right? Medications, keto, exercise, sleep. What is this thing that's going to get me feeling better? And I think for a lot of people, it can take a lot of trial and error and trying to figure out what works. But the message that I really want to impress on everyone is, it is worth just keeping going and trying to figure it out until you start to feel better. And I think it's so criminal that we're not introducing the diet and the nutrition as a key piece of this.
It should be the first line of treatment. The micronutrient piece has such an established evidence base with RCTs, with depression, with different mental illnesses. It really should be in my opinion, it should be the first reign of treatment. It should be the very first thing that we add as a broad spectrum micronutrient and look at the quality of the diet. And medication should be secondary because quite frankly, they deplete nutrients. Like the metformin, B12 deficiencies through the roof. Like there's ramifications to going to medications first. Fix that first piece, give them the building blocks that they need. And for anyone who is in that place where they have been chronically ill for a long time, whether it's with bipolar or some other illness, I want you to know that it is normal to go through stages where you don't try, where you are tired of having hope and you are tired of trying something new and you are tired of figuring it out. And that is a normal phase to go through. You're probably not going to stay there. And that's okay. But don't be in one of those dips where you're like, oh, I just want to survive for a while. Like I've had some disappointments and this is my life for a while. Just don't stay there forever. Keep having some hope. Keep being open to the idea that and the possibility that you're going to get better, because you can't stay here forever, that downward slope. But it is totally normal to dip, and it is totally, you deserve to have someone who can sit with you during those times of those dips and be like, okay, this is where we're at right now, and there's a possibility that there can be improvement in the future. Let me know when you're ready to play with that.
I like what you said, and I'll suggest a small adaptation, just that we work with a lot of psychiatrists and people who obviously as a frontline are prescribing medications, and always on the show we do advocate that people do what their psychiatrist tells them, because the medications are very effective in acute states, especially hospitalized people in very severe conditions. So we do need to enforce that, like when we talk about ketogenic diet, it's always secondary to what your psychiatrist is recommending that you do and is important for you. But but then the great thing about what you're saying is that there is a huge evidence base for dietary approaches and metabolic approaches for things like epilepsy, and we're establishing that for bipolar. And in the meantime, it's a therapy that can be tried alongside medication, and we can develop ways of doing that in a safe and structured way for people. So, but I think it's so true what you say, that this is an overlooked aspect of this that is so fundamental and important, and we'll find out so much more about it. And I really respect what you said about seeing that your patients can get better, because often you might be the only person in their life that's able to do that. They might have nobody else that they speak to that thinks they're going to get better. They've given up on them. They've kind of written them off, and they're just medicated, sitting at home, playing video game. This is so many people with bipolar are. And I've got friends that are like that right now. And it's so frustrating to watch the deterioration that happens sometimes. And just the fact that they have someone in their life that believes they can get better is so huge. It's so massive to their self-esteem and their possibility for the future. So thank you for seeing that in people and bringing that out in people with bipolar. It's so important. And I just wanted to ask Matt as well, like Nicole was saying about living. Do you have a couple more minutes, Nicole? I know we've run over.
Yeah, I'm good.
Sure. Yeah, and Nicole was saying about staying in the present moment. Is that something that you've brought up meditation in the past? Is that something that you find that the meditation helps you just experiencing the present and takes away some of the worries and concerns? Is that helpful?
Well, I think it's there are a lot of different benefits. I think the benefits of medication are far deeper than a lot of people understand them to be. A lot of people think it's just stress relief. I think there are profound, deep benefits to meditation, like impulse control and even improving conscientious behavior. The main reason, though, is the reset and the act of the mind wandering and bringing it back to the present moment, it can inform those decisions where, you know, I want to lash out, or you want to make some impulsive decision, and then, okay, reset, I'm angry, recognize that, and then proceed with caution. As far as the benefits directly related to mental health, I mean, I'm convinced it's a similar function to exercise. It's a stress reliever, and just practice consistently can have crazy effects on mood. I mean, it's not as well studied as, say, exercise, but my experience is that it's just one of those things. Even 10 minutes a day, even just a little bit, can have a huge impact.
It's really, and just to share someone who experienced it, having bipolar mood episodes, they can be so extreme, the depression, that you have almost no inclination to live. Well, I mean, you really do have no inclination to live sometimes. And it takes you to this weirdly present place in your life where you're not thinking about the future. You're not thinking about even mistakes you've made. Sometimes you just are so present with this pain that is in your experience, in your physiology. And it weirdly taught me to meditate. It taught me to kind of go to that place, but in a positive way afterwards. And like you're saying, Nicole, it's so beneficial because it takes away all the mental noise if you can get to that present place, like the rumination and the worry about the future. And so I think that's a really important aspect of getting through. If you're not responding to things at the moment, and if you're really struggling and in a lot of suffering, like, this is a really great thing that can help, is meditation, being in the present moment. And you've heard,
The one other thing I'll add is that I think there's something about the act of meditation. It takes away or relieves you from this notion of it being a lifelong struggle. And then the perspective change can be, okay, it's just today. Okay, so what can I do today for my recovery? And that's where I want my focus to be. And that is a much more manageable plate than having to think about dealing with this lifelong illness. It's just one day at a time. So, like, what can I do today?
Totally. That's such a great perspective on it. And yeah, and it's just a survival thing when you're going through those acute phases of it. And so I really hope that can be helpful for people who are currently going through this and not feeling well. But thank you so much, Nicole, for coming to talk to us today. And please visit mentalhealthketo.com and follow Nicole's work. Are you? What's your Twitter address, Nicole?
My what?
Your Twitter address.
Oh, I don't know. I think it's ketone counselor or keto counselor, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please follow.
We'll post it in the doodly below.
Yeah, we'll post. Is there anything else you want to shout out about? Anywhere else to find you online, or anything you would point people to?
No, I'm on Instagram. And yeah, I'm excited to help people learn about their different options, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care, guys. Bye.